Thank you for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. As an Orthodox Jew, can you make the case that conservatism is a Torah value? And why is political conservatism irrelevant without teshuva?
Sure. First, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to your audience. I I've been, for many years publishing books on being conservative, but being conservative is in my view is something that is really to a large extent based on Judaism. I mean, if you read my books, you'll see that the emphasis is to understand the Anglo-American tradition and the Christian tradition more generally as having been shaped and influenced, obviously not in all ways, but in some crucial ways, having been shaped by the Torah. And this is not something unconscious. This is something that people used to be very much aware of, but it's kind of disappeared. They don't teach it in universities anymore. People don't talk about it so much. So like an obvious example is that when we talk about nationalism, the idea of a world of independent nations, the idea that national independence, the freedom of a given people, that's better than having one world empire, which is going to squish everybody into the form that it wants. So this is a central political question in Torah. When you start to try to understand where did the Western nations, where did they get the idea of national independence? Well, it's not a Greek idea. The Greek didn't believe in nations. The Greek nation was never united. They believed in city-states. There was no such thing as an am or a goy that was seeking its independence and its internal unity, like in the Torah, where the Jews are seeking, all the different tribes are always seeking some kind of unity. There's forces pushing them apart. But the Torah is obviously on the side of the different shvatim, the different tribes of Am Yisrael coming together. And that doesn't come from Greece. It doesn't come from Rome, which was all about world empire. It comes only from the Torah. It comes only from the Tanakh and from Jewish ways of thinking about things. And of course, the basic idea of you become an Am, you leave Mitzrayim, you have laws that are your own laws. They're not the laws of the Amim. They're laws that are for your people, and of course that you hope someday to teach to other people because you think that they uniquely represent God's view. All of these ideas enter into the idea of an independent England, of an independent America. Even in continental Europe, France and other countries are deeply influenced by these Jewish ideas. And so, naturally, when we have these fights about should America be an independent country or should it become part of a kind of a new world order where the decisions are being made in Berlin or in The Hague or in the UN or something, people who understand what the argument is about naturally say, well, look, the idea of one world government, that's a Roman idea. But if you want to know, like, where does the idea of an independent nation, one nation under God, where does that come from? That's only in Judaism, and the Christians take it from there.
So why is that alternative why is it beneficial? Why is it beneficial to have this idea of nationalism?
Why should we have a world of independent nations? Because, well, look, think about what we know from the Tanakh. We know that that beginning with Migdal Bavel, with the Tower of Babel, there's a strong impulse that human beings have to rule everybody, to rule all human beings, and to make them into one language with one mission and one goal. And we know that God doesn't like this, but it's not just that God doesn't like it. The entire tradition of from Moshe Rabbeinu through the Nevi'im and then the Sofrim, the whole tradition is one that says, look, who's our big, our big enemies? It's true that they're small enemies like tribes like Amalek, but if we ask, what's the big threat to the world in the time of the Tanakh, the big threat is world empire. It's the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, and then later the Hellenistic Greeks and the Romans. All of these are under the theory of a world empire, and all of them are resisted by the Jews, who are our avot, our forefathers, and our heroes, our teachers. They're always on the other side. They're saying, if we take Sefer Dvarim, if we take Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses teaching us about what should a Jewish political order look like, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu gives the Jewish people borders. Okay, the Romans don't believe in borders because they don't believe anybody should be independent. They give the Jewish people borders. Moshe tells Am Yisrael that they're not supposed to conquer the neighbors, because the neighbors, they have their own way to God. Now, we think that our Torah teaches a truth that is accessible and important for everybody, but nonetheless, we're not supposed to go conquer the neighbors. So what are we supposed to do? Well, Moshe tells us we're supposed to have a king who's from our people, from among his brothers, that we're supposed to have Nevi'im from our people. That's not because there weren't Nevi'im in the other Amim. We know that Bilam and other Nevi'im existed in the other Amim. But for the Jews, we need to have a Jewish prophet, just like we need to have a Jewish king. And the whole idea here is that when your king is appointed by the Egyptians or the Babylonians, then he's not your king. It's part of an occupation army. He does what the Babylonians want him to do, and if not, they get rid of him. And so the idea that you have borders, but within your borders, you have to get rid of the king that's appointed by some foreign government, and have him be someone who the Am wants. Now, obviously, the king also has to be somebody that God wants. The people Jewish people aren't allowed to choose somebody evil, but in the Torah, both of these things are important. That the ruler has to be acceptable to his people, so that, because we want him to care about his people, we want him to be part of the family of his people, and he has to be acceptable to God, because obviously there's moral standards of the Torah that have to be upheld. So I think it's not surprising then that when you look at Christian history, or at Western history and modern history, where do the nations turn when they're interested in this kind of idea of a free nation, an independent nation? They turn to Yetziat Mitzrayim. They turn to the liberation of the Jewish people from the rule of the Egyptians, and the liberation from the Greeks, and so on. This becomes a model for non-Jews who read the Torah and say, wow, look, we also want to be free as a nation. We want to be able to chart our own course, and to have a relationship with God that's based on our understanding. Like the Dutch fought for 80 years for independence, so that they could have their own way to God, not the way that the Spanish Universal Catholic Empire wanted them to have. So this is one of the things that the Jews taught the nations. It's a very, very important teaching today. It's incredibly relevant right now, and there are many other things.
So in terms of it being relevant today, I think I want to hone in on that, because unfortunately, nationalism is kind of a loaded term today, and people will mistakenly say like, "Oh, well, Hitler was a nationalist."
Mm-hmm.
What is it? How would we respond to that in terms of what is nationalism today? What is it really about? And why is it important? Why is it so important for the world? Forget about religious Jews, but for the world to accept such a notion.
Yeah. Okay. So we should definitely pay more attention to the idea than the word. Okay, well, we can talk about the word, but the important thing is the idea that's behind it. The idea that is that we read in the Nevi'im when they talk about Atid Lavo, they're constantly describing a world in which there are many nations, and the big empires, right, are not trying to the powerful nations are not trying to create big empires by conquering all the other nations, right? That is the idea that the lion or the wolf is going to lie down with the lamb. The idea is that in the future, even a powerful nation like the Babylonians, they will be friends with Israel, and Israel will be able to be independent without being afraid that the Babylonians are going to come in and wipe out the Jewish government and impose their own laws. Okay, now this aim is good for the world. It's good for the world to have many different nations. That's why the prophets, look, it would have been the easiest thing in the world for Moshe or for the Nevi'im to say, well, just like all the other nations, the Babylonians or the Assyrians, every year they set out for 300 years. Every year they had a campaign to try to conquer the whole world as much as possible. And the gods of all of these empires in the Middle East, they always tell the king, go out and conquer the four corners of the earth. We find this over and over. These are very different empires, but this is always the same, that the god always tells the king, go conquer the four corners of the earth, bring peace and prosperity to the world by eliminating independent nations, by eliminating borders. And the Nevi'im, who, they argue with one another about all sorts of things. But about this, there's complete agreement that for them, a nation that sets out to conquer all of the neighboring nations is not bringing peace and prosperity. In the eyes of the Jewish teachers, it's when the world recognizes borders, and each nation, or at least many nations, are allowed to find their own path. This is in the eyes of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Nevi'im. This is a just world. A just world is one in which nations are not trying to set out to conquer, to rape and pillage and plunder all of the neighbors and take control of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and regarding the comment about Hitler, that's thrown around a lot. That
right. We live in a very ignorant age, and one of the things people like to do is to use Hitler in order to sort of end every conversation, no matter what the topic is. You've got to accept my opinion because Hitler was such and such. Yeah. Now, look, in my book, The Virtue of Nationalism, I take up this question. I recommend it to people if they haven't read it. The distinction, there's a distinction that's very important between between a tribal society in which everything is kind of crumbled into lots of small pieces. So the tribal society is like what we see in Sefer Shoftim, where the tribes, they're free to do what they want, but since they can't unify for major efforts, whether to fight a war or to build a mikdash, they can't unify for major efforts, and so you have these idealists like Gidon and Shmuel who say, look, we don't need a human king. We should only God should be our only king, and there's something very, very true and Jewish about this. But the fact is that they can't unify, and it brings to constant defeat and constant disaster and avodah zarah and all sorts of horrible moral perversity. And so there's a concept of uniting to create an independent nation. And that independent nation is different from an imperial state, which isn't looking for an independent nation. It's looking for the whole world to become one state. Okay, so this is the main political distinction in talking about political order is, are you talking about a world in which there's one central government, or are you talking about a world in which there are many governments over different nations? Okay, and the Jewish view is that we want to be independent, and we also want to allow other nations to be independent. Now, a very simple question. Hitler in Mein Kampf, which I don't recommend that you read, but if you read it, you'll see that Hitler is what we could call a biological imperialist. He says that there's a superior race and that race should conquer the whole world. He says Germany has to become lord of the earth or mistress of the globe. These are expressions in Mein Kampf. That's the goal. Okay, so if that's the goal, does that make Hitler a nationalist or an imperialist?
Not. Absolutely.
Is Nazi Germany a national state or is it an imperial state? Right. Okay. So if he's saying I want to unite the German tribes, okay, so fine. Okay, so that's a national state. But if he's saying that I want to be lord of the globe, lord of the earth and mistress of the globe, then he's an imperialist. He's not a nationalist. In fact, Hitler is explicitly, when he talks about independent nations, he explicitly says this idea of independent nations, that that the British or the French, they want independence, and he says that's a weak, that's a pathetic, weak invention of weak nations, that they want to be small, they don't want to conquer the globe like we do, but we know better. All right, so now it's true that Hitler uses the word nationalism, but he didn't invent the word nationalism. He simply substitutes. He takes the word nationalism, which until Hitler always meant a world of independent nations. He takes that word and he substitutes it, and he says, he never uses the word imperialism. He doesn't use the word empire. He just says, okay, so German nationalism is to take over the whole world. So I need to change my political theory to learn from Hitler? Give me a break. I mean, it's just simply ignorant. There's no affinity for the true nationalism, which is the nationalism of the Tanakh, of the Jews, and of those Christian peoples who learned it from the Jews and other peoples. In India, I was just reading a book by a prominent intellectual from India today, and you'll be surprised that he says that the founder of his movement, he's talking about the governing, the ruling BJP in India, and their example of what is a true nation like, that he keeps coming back to again and again, is Israel and the Jewish people. Right? Well, this is something that we have to teach the world. The independence of India, when you ask them, it turns out that at least some of them say, yes, we want to be independent like the Jews.
Fascinating.
I see so much passion when you speak about it. Dr. Hazony, what would you say about woke culture and how it fits into the scheme? How would woke culture fit in with this narrative?
Well, look, so I have a new book which is called Conservatism: A Rediscovery, and I heard a rumor that one or both of you took a look at it, and it's so that the whole book is really about teshuva. It's about Masoret and teshuva, and about how to save America and Britain and other Western nations by returning to a tradition that is that's based on, I don't tell them, that they should study the New Testament. I tell them study the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and like their forefathers did. Now, the old view of America and other countries as one nation under God, that's the famous line from the Pledge of Allegiance. It was adopted under Eisenhower in 1954. The idea of one nation under God that's the idea that Americans, when they knew the Bible, when they knew the Jewish Bible, the way that they conceived of America was as kind of like an updated Israel, that there's one God and we're loyal to that God, and there's a law. It's true that Christians have all sorts of ideas about halakha, but one thing that they all used to agree about, for example, is that the Aseret Dvarim, that the Ten Commandments of Moshe are a law for them. Right? That's something that all the European thinkers for centuries and centuries agreed about, both Catholics and Protestants. And certainly in America, when they thought about one nation under God, they thought, well, like the tribes of Israel, we have many states, but we form a unity, and our unity is devoted to God and to the Ten Commandments and to man created in God's image and various other things that they learned from the Torah. And all of this, I think it's fair to say, these are important elements of the traditional conservatism, the traditional political theory, the traditional worldview in England, in Britain, and later in America. And I try to show that in my book, the way that the Brits and the Americans take this Jewish inheritance and adopt parts of it in order to build their very, very successful and impressive nations. And this close association, self-association of the Anglo-American tradition with Jews and Judaism and the Jewish scriptures, the self-image that, that they're the new Israel, that they're building the new Jerusalem. These are things that they say over and over again, and it comes to an end after World War II. So in the book, I go into why it came to an end, but the main thing to know is not that complicated. That Americans continued to see themselves as a Christian nation, as a biblical nation, up until World War II. If you take, and even after, even into the 1950s, but if you take Roosevelt's State of the Union address from 1939, before the war, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't say we're a liberal democracy and we're fighting for liberal democracy like people say today. He doesn't say anything like that. Roosevelt says our nation is built on our religion, on our Christian ideas, on our biblical ideas, and it is from those ideas that we get democracy, that we get the goal of world peace. That's the way Roosevelt talks to his people, as he says, this all comes from our religion. Without it, we have nothing. And after World War II, Americans and Europeans stopped talking like that, and they replaced Christianity with liberalism. And many Jews, of course, thought, okay, well, the Christians have been hostile to us for a long time, so things will be better if the liberals are in charge instead of the Christians. And so, okay, so we tried that. It went on for 2 generations. By 1963, the liberals had eliminated all Bible, God, tradition from all the schools in America. They'd taken it from a public religion to a private religion, that everybody, the religion is only something that you do privately in your home. If you want, you can go for an hour on Sunday and have some religion. But America is going to be neutral. That it's going to support no religion. That's the liberal idea. So here we are, it's 2 generations later, maybe a little bit more, 70 years later. Well, 1963 to today. It's exactly 60 years later. So it's 2 generations. And it's taken 2 generations from the time that Americans stopped thinking that their children needed to study Tanakh, that they needed to study Bible in schools, 2 generations from there to the point that people can't tell the difference between a man and a woman. That 40% of the children in America now, 40% are born outside of marriage. The whole thing is disintegrating in front of our eyes. And it's not just disintegrating, because there's no such thing as a vacuum and in political thought, political ideas. And as soon as the Christian order the conservative order is eliminated, and they say, no, just do whatever you want. These utterly evil woke ideas, which are they're not even liberal, but they're like an outgrowth of liberalism. Again, if you want details, read the book. But it's these woke neo-Marxist ideas. They start with liberalism, that everybody's free, should be free and equal, and then they look and they say, well, look, but people aren't free and equal, and then they suggest the reason that people aren't free and equal. Well, why? It's because people believe in God. It's because people believe in Torah. They believe in the nation. They believe in the family, and they believe in the difference between man and woman. And progressively, these progressives, these woke neo-Marxists, they purposely work to destroy every concept, every idea that used to hold the old Jewish and Christian political public order in place. Okay, so we shouldn't be mistaken. Of course, they're going after the Christians first because the Christians are stronger in America. But there's not going to be. Look at the way the courts in New York are forcing Yeshiva University to have LGBTQ clubs. I mean, can you imagine? Like this isn't liberal religious freedom. This is where liberalism goes. It goes to an oppressive, anti-God, anti-Masorah, anti-biblical and anti-Torah worldview. And nothing is going to be left in the end if this isn't defeated. And Jews need to fight it. They need to actually, at this point, join with those brave Christians who are willing to stand up against this and say no.
But how can you this is actually the last question, but how can we defeat something that is so ingrained? Like academia is just dominated, and this isn't new. This is for the last 60 years.
Indoctrination.
Right? It's indoctrination. It's already like all the next leaders of the world in America are being kind of taught this from a young age. And how can this even be reversed?
Look, all of this is true, but I think it's very important at this point to remember the lessons that we learn as children, as Jews. We believe that if we do the right thing, that sometimes God will interfere and help us. Okay, that's the story of. I mean, the whole basis for Judaism is that it's the resistance of 5 women in Egypt that leads to Moshe Rabbeinu being born and him leading Am Yisrael out of Israel. Sometimes it takes a long time for God to hear our cry, but we believe that in the end God will hear our cry. We just need to do the right thing. Now, I'm not saying this just as a matter of believe in God, don't try to understand what's going on. I'm not saying anything like that. I just think we're terrible at seeing what the real effects of passionate resistance are on a system. I mean, we can look backwards and we can see in 3 years, the woke neo-Marxists have taken, since 2020, in 3 years, they've succeeded in taking control of almost every liberal institution in America. Okay, so they look powerful. They look like the chariots of Egypt. They look like the Babylonian army. They look super powerful. And when we look at it, we say, well, we're like chagavim. We're like grasshoppers, right? How can we fight against this? But the world is just much more complicated than what we understand when we look at it. And if you want real world examples, just take a look at this very interesting example of the Dobbs decision on abortion. How for 50 years, I mean, it's hard to say that anything was more ingrained in Americans by generations of education in a liberal direction than this idea that if a woman is pregnant, it doesn't matter even what stage of the pregnancy it is. The child can be almost fully formed, but still she has a right to terminate the pregnancy, which is a nice way of often saying to kill the baby. 50 years that ruled in America. And by the way, the Europeans never got to that level of craziness. They're crazy about all sorts of other things, but not about this. 50 years this ruled in America, but there was a small group of people, mostly Catholics, but also Protestants, who devoted their lives to ending this. And after 50 years, they ended it. Not only did they end that evil decree of the Supreme Court, but they also returned the Supreme Court to an earlier, and this is an important part of conservatism, is they restored Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. They restored the earlier American Constitution, which was a freer constitution that allowed the different states to make different decisions instead of having just the one court in the country make the decisions for everybody. And that's one example of the way a very small group of people, if they're devoted and determined, and if they have faith, then they can in the end win at a time when it looks like we're losing on everything, and look, they won. So look, we're not God. We don't make the decisions here, but it's up to us to decide whether we are going to put our efforts into what is just and right. And also, I think aside from that, there's also an important Chilul Hashem issue here, which I think it's important to emphasize. You can't imagine, if you go to my conferences, my friends and I, we run these national conservatism conferences. You cannot imagine how much strength the Christians who are fighting these battles, how much strength they get when Jews come and speak and say, I'm on your side. Because we don't understand. We think that Christianity is a self-contained thing, and they don't particularly care about what Jews think, and maybe they don't like us. We think all of these things, but when you come and you meet them, you'll see that they really do. Many of them look at us as the source, the ultimate source of the truths that they believe in. Many of them, even if they don't say this, many of them feel that. And when Jews show up and start to say, look, we're on the side of God, and we're on the side of the Torah, and we're going to stand by you, the emotions it unleashes, they're so grateful and so moved by this. And we ourselves, I think if we look at this battlefield and we don't see the Jews out front fighting for the truth and the things we believe in, if we abandon that, I just think the damage that's done is immense. It's immense to leave the battlefield when we're free and we're part of this world, and we've got the Torah, and we think that we know how to interpret it, and they don't. Okay, that's our view. So how can we, if we know the truth, how can we, representing God's truth, how can we sit on the sidelines and just say, oh, it doesn't matter?
That was phenomenal.
Unbelievable.
Really.
We would love to do this again. This is amazing.
Okay.
And there's so many topics that we want to talk about with you on your books, specifically on philosophy and Judaism. So we hope to do this again. Thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure.
God bless.
Really powerful words. Thank you so much.
Okay. See you soon.
What
Take care.
Tzlacha.